Well, I'm John Dennis, and I'm House. I was born that way. Didn't have much of an option. Unlike most people, my mother went into labor, and she was shouting at a Pentecostal church in St. Louis, Missouri. She went into labor, and her water broke, and she was shouting, and I've been shouting and dancing and jacking ever since. I don't have much of an option. I originally started dancing. Have to say my roots are in disco. And for those people who don't understand about house and disco, they don't understand the racial impact, but more importantly, they don't understand that disco gave us the freedom and it opened up the dance floor. That's the beautifulest thing is when the racism came in, I think that was in 82, I believe that's when they burnt all the disco albums at Soldiers Field. And at that particular time, because the disco sucks, that's when they had to reinvent disco and we came into house. House, they the big discrepancy if it's a Chicago sound. And I was in Chicago at that time, and that was the search and the great desperation for the Roland 808 drum machine. But you have to remember that house was before the 808. House comes from South Philadelphia. It comes from that great bass line of love is the message. If you was to go in the great house clubs in Chicago and New York, you remember Ron Hardy and them. He lived both of them to play that sound of Philadelphia, that Harold Melvin, Teddy Pendergrass, that love is the message. Now we got to remember that that bass line, the most instrument one that we developed that everyone was obsessed with, was Soul Train, and that comes from Philadelphia, and that was where Chicago started. Soul Train is a Chicago theme. It was a local show before it moved out to LA and became national. But house and technology is Chicago. I always think of Chicago put the technology that says you did not, only where you could do a record was not in a studio, but you could do it in your house. And that's where it came from. The studio and the fact that you can only get it at the warehouse from Frankie Knuckles. When I got to Atlanta, probably the two strongest promoters that were in Atlanta in the house music would be David Hampton from Trax, who did the Ritz Boys Underground, which was truly a real underground experience, and it would have to be Derek Hodge, who did Excelsior Mill, which he had it was the AU Center, and that's what really brought house music to Atlanta. There was a DJ called Ted Patterson at the time who used to spin at a club on Tuesday night in Highland Park called the Color Box. There was another club that they used to do on the weekend called Phoenix, which later became Trax, which was right on Marietta Street. But those were the first times of coming there. Probably the most interesting thing that really would say kicked off Atlanta is there was a guy, David Hampton, and he had an underground club called the Ritz Boys. And the Ritz Boys was in a dress shop on Poplar Street. And it was an all-night after-hour club that went from like about midnight to 6 or 7 in the morning. And one year it had became so popular, remember just one day a week, on that Saturday night, trying to get that garage, and Atlanta wanted that all-night experience. And they were raided by the Atlanta Police Department. Came in with buses, and loaded and took everybody to jail. I think it was 67 people they took to jail that night. And David got them all out. And that was the start of the real true Atlanta community. You cannot talk about house or the black LGBT in Atlanta without mentioning David Hampton, because he was significant, because he understood the racism that was going on at the time, at the town, and he came up with the concept, I would rather be in my own shack instead of being in someone else's house. Because the other white clubs were not accepting blacks at the time. They had 2-3 IDs that would come in. There was a big club called Backstreets. They used to literally have a black line, and the blacks would wait until someone white with a membership that would allow them in. And David Hampton has understood the importance of bringing house and community together as one. And that's what's probably been the most significant that I noticed about it. It wasn't a great house scene, but they had a stronger sense of community back then in the 80s initially. Yeah, David Hampton had that killer instinct, what it really took to make it in Atlanta. In addition to that, there was the great, what was his name? Oh my God. The guy from Columbus, Ohio, James Mason, who James Mason is the one who was one of the backers who owned tracks, but he also had owned like all the straight clubs as well. And people don't know that Atlanta, during its heyday of developing its nightlife, it was always owned by gay guys and red. And that would kind of gave the freedom. The same thing with the strip clubs. They kind of go together. People never really match those two together. But that's where the culture, because everyone knows about the great gay clubs and the great strip clubs in Atlanta, and not realizing they both have kind of been married together for the same freedom, But Atlanta, on that house scene coming to there, you can't leave out Sir Hodge, Derek Hodge, who was instrumental in realizing that there was a market. And he still does an event right now, which is still there. But I mean, some of the same players who were here initially 30, 40 years ago, those that are truly dedicated to house and not the money, you'll find that they are still reinvented and they're still here today. And I'd like to think that I was one of them. During that particular period there, probably we even had a record store at that time. And during the 80s and 90s, the record stores were always like the city hall or like the anchor of the community for music. And that was Earwax down there. Jazz used to run that. And that's where all the DJs and all the music would go through. And if you want to know something, you would be there. We used to have a thing called Second Saturday, which was the second Saturday, which they turned the record store into a disco at that time, which is interesting because it's directly across the street. The Federal Reserve is what killed it. The new Federal Reserve is what, if you look at the old Peachtree and you see what it is now compared to that, you just see there's such a musical history that had been lost that people would rather not know about. There was Foster's, Loretta's, In Between, Ornery, Bulldogs, Weekends. I mean, there's just all kind of clubs, Mr. V's, VIPs, all on Peachtree. There did used to be nightlife on Peachtree, and that was just a certain decadence of freedom that it used to give you right there on Peachtree. Going there. And that was house, and if they didn't have it on the weekend, there was always the weekdays that you could find house in any of the clubs in Atlanta. It was much more there. But then we danced then. People dance now. People don't dance now. That's why we like to think of Indigenous House. Our VIPs are on the dance floor. You just can't buy it. Indigenous House is the original house, people. Started in 2010. Started off at Piedmont Park, where it's always been. We've always went, and now we're grandfathered in. We are the third Sunday in May every year. Starts at 12 and it ends at 10. We like to think of ourselves as Atlanta's longest dance marathon. We make sure by 12 o'clock that first beat goes on, and we make sure you're going to get at least a good 10 hours of nonstop dance music, Another thing about Indigenous House, again, going back with that same concept with David Hampton, it is to bring back community back in there. And that's what people tend to do. And what I think is different about indigenous house than the other events and people can't put in there. It is a collective of everyone because everybody has a little bit of everything in them, and they can finally bring their friends, their family, their co-workers, don't matter if they're rich, poor, black, white, dumb, smart, if they're still just evolving. We feel like when they get there in the dance, in the music, that's going to get them there. And that's what indigenous house is supposedly be. Now, a lot of people don't realize indigenous means the original people, just like the Indians are the indigenous people. Indigenous house is the original house people. We come from the LGBT clubs, I like to think from the Paradise Garage in New York City all the way to the Catch One LA. And you can find people at almost all those clubs, and I can almost name them all. Besides those ones, the most famous one, the Paradise Garage, Catacombs in Philadelphia, the Clubhouse in DC, or Odell's in Baltimore, or if you want to go into better days, Todd's or Heaven in Detroit, the Warehouse in Chicago, Club the Ray the Generator, Tracks in DC, Tracks in Cleveland, Tracks in Denver, Zeep Lounge, Wolfie Dale's in New Orleans, even Catch One and Studio One out of Houston. And all those were kind of like were safe zones where people could go and find music and, more importantly, find themselves. Well, Atlanta has not, DJs are always have been competitive because being a DJ is being artistic. And you really can't, when you judge the arts, if they're dancing, if it's painting, if it's singing, if it's modeling, everyone's going to feel like what they do is better because it's an art. Now, the other side of that, you can be the greatest DJ there is, but if people won't pay to hear you, or you have to pay people, and you have to pay the event, and people will not come and hear you, you're really not that, your skills are still evolving, But it's always been competitive, and that's everywhere. Now, Atlanta is a little bit more competitive, and it's different because we are more regional. Most cities, they DJs, you have the Chicago sound or the Jersey sound or the LA sound or the New York sound. But here in Atlanta, we have all those sounds. You're going to find people from New York, Chicago, DC, Baltimore, and all of them are very loyal to their sound. So when you say these DJs are competing, it's more than them just competing about them being the DJ. They also representing where they're from. And they take that very, very personal. I didn't plan on throwing parties. It's just that there's an evolution. I've always been on the dance floor. But as you get older and you just have that relationship with the dance floor, you got to make sure it's done right. And sometimes the promoters or the other people who were promoting them, they really just didn't have a true concept of what was happening on the dance floor. So my responsibility of developing parties came from the fact that no one else was doing it. And I just come from one of those black civil rights families with a lot of civic pride that I'm not going to tell somebody what to do when I need to sit there and do it myself. I'm not going to tell anybody at the other events if I like or not like them because I know they put a lot of time and work, effort, and probably money as well. So they have the right to do their event the way they wish to do it. If they want to do their party any way they want to, I'm fine with that. I just don't have to come. I don't have to participate. Or I can just give mediocre to what I feel is fine. But they do have to respect that I know it takes a lot of work and effort. Now, I do it because I am committed to the dance floor and I understand it brings a lot more. I understand that I have to do it as a community responsibility. There's not many people who have the background or a set of skill set who's really committed to getting the event not only done but completed and finished. And in addition to that, It's like I have helped numerous, I've done a total of 28 permitted events in the city of Atlanta. And doing permits can be somewhat challenging because they're usually about 25 or 30 pages. And now that it's gotten very competitive to do those events, you have to go through the city hall and city councilman and MPU meetings. And it takes a lot of rapport to navigate through all the bureaucracy that city government offers to get that one little permit to say it's okay, you can be at Piedmont Park between the hours of 12 and 8 and you can play amplified sound. They just don't give that casually to anyone. And to move that a little bit further, they really don't do that. They won't give those permits. I don't know of any place in the country really issuing those permits to R&B or hip hop. The difference between house as we see it that comes from Chicago, or the more from the myths of R&B, because that's what house is. In the words of Mel Turin from West End label, it's danceable R&B, which is usually about 114 or 116 BPMs or higher. That's what house is. EDM, which is about 130. And you get to a certain harmonic groove when you get to that level, usually with that and drugs, which house is not on. So you have to get to be about 130 beats per minute, and then on drugs to be on that EDM to enjoy that, opposed to house music. Like I said, it starts at about 114, 116 BPM, so it's a little bit slower, a lot more funkier, a lot more soulful, and more importantly, it usually has a message that you can identify with. That's what's the difference between EDM and house. EDM doesn't say anything. House talks to your soul. I come from a family, and the first black millionaire in Atlanta is Jesse Hill from St. Louis, Missouri, which engineered the whole concept of black business in Atlanta. It was absolute imperative to him to understand that black business had to be among itself, and that's on Auburn Street. So that concept has always been indicative to be in the Atlanta market. And that's when people come from up north, they're just amazed that the wealth and the amount of money that black people have in Atlanta. And it's not that they don't use it well, it's just that we have so many, and it's just such a large diverse. If you look like 20, I think Interstate 20 is the best example. You get from downtown, it starts at about exit 50, and it's fully developed to exit 90, which is predominantly black. There's no place in the country that has that much development of black wealth. 40 miles? Well, the grid is based on racism, but that's not Atlanta. That's every major city in America is like that. I will say it's different. I was telling him one day, we were on Moreland Avenue, and if you take Moreland Avenue and you take it all the way around, on Ponce it turns into Briarcliff. And the reason is black people couldn't live on Briarcliff. That was all white. Now, there's always been that redlining in district. That's federal government. That is CRT. That is the 1619 Project, the institution of redlining. When black men came home from World War II, they didn't get a house. All white men got a house in the suburbs. That was the GI Bill. So that's just the way it is. That's the great suburb. This is not having to do that, but that has nothing to do with house. But that's just the way that's just it, Well, house has evolved quite a bit. In Atlanta and the rest of the world, the Atlanta market, as in most markets in the U.S., is kind of aging out. You can't expect people in their 50s and 60s to be out weekly. Their lives are just not going to allow them that. Now, I do find it interesting that Europeans are just absolutely fascinated with the whole culture of house music and the fact how African Americans can relate to the music and they just cannot get a grasp on it like they can over in Europe. They have the foundation, they have the electronics, they have the money, they have everything, but they just can't get that connection to the soul and the rhythmic back that they have in America as they have in Europe. Where we're going with house, that is the $1,000,000 question, because we're not only aging out, I don't know if we will ever recover from the pandemic. I was trying to book an event and I was trying to find an artist, and the reality is there are just not any artists available that have any current hits right now that you can put on the stage like you could put a diva or Barbara Tucker or Monique Bingham, where you know that one would want to see them because they have had songs that they can identify that really to get to their heart. You know, a diva, you know, You Gotta Respect Me, or Barbara Tucker, I Get Lifted, Be a Beautiful Person, Monique Bingham, Elevator. You're just trying to make something that really you can deal with that will inspire you. That music is not there. The problem is we don't have the clubs. The parties and the clubs are totally different. A club, a DJ is spinning for a living. When DJs are spinning for a living, they're going to dance that crowd. When you're doing a party and a DJ didn't spit there and he didn't rent the place, put the equipment in there, got the turntables and promoted, he's going to play what he want to play. And he has every right to do that. But the reality is the frequency is just not there. Right now, I can't even name 10 good hits. So what happens is the audience wants classics. Well, there's no money in classics because we can't go back to yesterday. Only so much. We have to live tomorrow. But what you're gonna say, because there's not a vehicle to really promote new music and new music with vocals that people can relate to. So until someone figures out how to sell music, which I think before the pandemic, we had a guy here, DJ Kemet, who had the last 2 tracks that I know, songs that have really been able to resonate and have a recognition that would get a following on the dance floor. We haven't had any since then. So then, if you're dancing a crowd, you're going to have to go back to classics. They want to play something else. People are going to dance to what they know. Music is a learned behavior. If you don't, you always say, a DJ should be able to teach you, supposed to educate you. DJs are not supposed to sit up there and play music for you. They're supposed to be an education process. They're supposed to be on a journey to start you in one place and end you up to that way there. We have now, a lot of these DJs, they think that their music is going to save the day, is going to save the world, when they can't even get you through a night. What are you going to do then? Because that's why they got 10 people on the dance floor, 50 of them, they dancing sporadically back there. And these people don't know the music. These people like that. It's not their responsibility to learn your music. Just stop. When would you go in to learn somebody else's music? You have to sit up there and develop a relationship. And I look at a lot of these DJs that are playing now, they have a dysfunctional relationship with their audience. It's hit or miss. They get bothered and they don't know why, and they want to blame it on everyone, but they're just so egotistical they can't realize they need to look at themselves. After we say they need to look up at your dance floor and not down to see what you're playing. Sometimes, we always think of Chicago because it's home of the Hot Mix 5, the 3-minute mix. You should be getting out of if the crowd is not feeling your mix, you should be getting out of it that first or second break. Don't sit up there and think you're going to force them in there, knowing that you only got for a 90-minute or an hour set, 2-hour set at the most, if you're lucky. Because this is not the old days where you have the 10-hour set or the 6 when you got them in there. These DJs only get a couple of minutes, and 3 or 4 DJs on the bill, hoping, thinking they can bring more people in, which doesn't work. And then they're sitting there trying to figure out what to play because they want to play the new banging track that they just got down from Yugoslavia or Croatia that they think is good, which can't hold it for 5 minutes because these people don't know this. And in addition to that, it doesn't have any soul and they can't understand anything to it. And a lot of times with DJs, it's easier to make and to play instrumentals than there is to play vocals. It takes a real talented producer to make a track with a vocal and put it on there where it says something, means something, and people say, oh, I want that again. And if you worked in a record store, there's nothing more annoying to somebody and you a DJ say, can you play this song? And they go, dit. Now the opposer, it's saying like, oh, it's the squirrel, and she's just saying she's homeless, and she's homeless. Oh, okay. But you can at least figure it out. It's hard to sell an instrumental or an African track. You know, I always say, if one thing Africa taught me from being in Africa is I'm an African American. I can only take so many African tracks, and then they get to be redundant, repeated, and then I just don't feel them. That's just not where I come from. And probably the most important thing that a lot of people neglect to realize, especially on the LGBT, that most of that audience come out of the church. So they're going to need that tambourines, and they're going to need that gospel, and they're going to need that vocals. So you trying to play it, you know these people been gospel their whole life right there, and then you're going to go in and say, oh, we're going to play some opera. And you're going to sit there, why these people ain't playing opera? Well, that's not their roots. They can't play that. So they just want the crowd, and you have to work. It used to be you would only catch it if you wasn't in the clubs. If you were lucky enough to get a CD or a tape from a DJ, or you could maybe get the Saturday night and on late night radio stations to get house music, dance music, disco, club music. You could pick up your phone and get 1,000 stations from around the world. That don't mean it's good. You know, as we like to say, I was moved to Atlanta when we had quality over quantity. And that's the same concept with house music. We used to have quality over quantity. I can remember I used to be trying to sell records in New York, and I used to hate those A&R people. This is one of those things that maturity have taught me their real purpose, because they were screeners to let you know that's some bullshit. That would never make it. That's not a new record. Now you can make a record Monday, and you can have it charted Monday afternoon, and then Wednesday it's up. But by the time we get to Thursday, there's another record that took your place, and ain't nobody in there. So you can make the best record in the world, but if you haven't found a way to sell it, it's just in there. And that's what DJs have did. They think to themselves, and I've often known, and myself has been guilty of that as well. You hear a track, you get it first, you make it first, you play it more, because music is a learned behavior. The more you hear it, the more you like it, the more you know it. And you think that everyone knows it, and it's just you and you in your own world. And the minute you hit the dance floor and you play it, it's a dud. And you're like, what's wrong? When the problem is it was you the whole time. You know, you had no relationship with that audience. I can remember one of my friends who's a big DJ in New York, and he'd always say, a good night is 3 in 1. I play 3 songs they like and 1 that I like. Today's DJs, what they really lack is they lack a relationship and a personality, because to be a successful DJ now, you have to have a rapport with the audience not only on the dance floor when you're spinning records, but before you even get to the club. They have to really feel like you are their DJ. You have to have a relationship with them just like you do your wife. They have to call you, talk to you, know you. You have to walk them through every step of the way. You have to give them records before then, tell them what's new is hot, send them to you, talk to them, get them in. They have to feel like they are in tune with you. To sit up there and to just think you're just going to go in there and not know the crowd, not have any relationship with them, spin the records, and play a brand new record that they ain't never heard before. We're going to continue to be exactly where we are now, them dance floors where you can shoot a cannon through the dance floor and not hit no one.